The chandelier light felt blinding as my sister toasted my lucky paycheck, her laugh cutting through the smell of smoked turkey and pecan pie. Name's Everett Calhoun, 47. The family's so-called secretary, fingers tight on my navy leather folio, under the table. Ever been humiliated by your own kin and wondered what they didn't know about you? The first laugh cut sharper than any carving knife on that table. Lori tilted her head back and said it loud enough for the china to rattle Everett, our family's eternal secretary. At least you can pour the wine right. The words rolled around the oak-paneled dining room, echoing faintly off the window glass, where the Savannah River glimmered in the fading light. My hand stayed steady as I poured, but my fingers tightened around the navy leather folio resting on my knee, a familiar weight pressing into my lap. Its edges were worn smooth, the brass clasp cool under my thumb, and inside were papers far more potent than anyone at that table could imagine. The air was thick with smoked turkey, and the sweetness of pecan pie cooling on the sideboard scents I had grown up with, but somehow felt foreign now. A tugboat's horn groaned somewhere beyond the glass, long and low, as if the river itself sighed for me. I took my seat near the end of the table, nodding to cousins I barely saw outside of holidays. Lori leaned close to Thad, her manicured nails tapping against his wrist as she whispered about quarterly targets and impressions for the board. Thad's eyes darted to his phone, the screen lighting up his face in ghostly blue as he scrolled jaw tight. I said nothing, content to be the quiet figure they thought I was, the man who kept minutes and fetched coffee while others made real decisions. Dinner unraveled with the usual rhythm of small talk and subtle barbs. Silverware chimed lightly against china while Lori regaled the room with stories of her latest boardroom victory, each one laced with a sideways glance in my direction. When she asked me how filing expense reports was going, I offered a shrug and a faint smile, letting the jab land without protest. A couple of relatives chuckled awkwardly, glancing between us as if to gauge how sharp the edge really was. I used the lull to study Thad, watching how his knee bounced beneath the table, his eyes flicking to a notification before he slid the phone into his jacket. There was tension behind that polished grin, the kind of tension that made people sloppy. The plates cleared, and wine glasses refilled the fireplace, throwing a wavering glow that softened none of the glances Lori shot my way. She lifted her glass high, the crystal catching the light like ice. "Here's to Everett," she said, smile wide, voice syrupy. "Our lucky charm, still cashing checks, still fetching lattes, still loyal." A few laughs rippled through the table, some genuine, most uneasy. I raised my own glass with a measured nod, the amber liquid inside catching the same glow as the river lights outside. The folio pressed against my knee, a reminder of why their laughter didn't sting as deeply as it once might have. When the toast died down and conversation shifted back to Thad's plans for the next fiscal quarter, I let my gaze drift to the dark stretch of river beyond the window. The tugboat's horn moaned again, distant and hollow. I felt my thumb brush along the folio's worn edge, tracing the groove where the leather had frayed over the years. My smile lingered soft, thin, unreadable. They could see a secretary tonight if they wanted. Soon enough, they would see something else entirely. The river rolled on in the dark, steady and silent, and in that silence, my next move began to take shape. The hum of the HVAC was the only sound, holding the dark office together, a steady whisper beneath the faint flicker of the exit sign down the hall. My screen cast a thin glow across the desk, soft enough to make the shadows stretch long and sharp across the carpet. Midnight in downtown Savannah wasn't silent. The occasional wail of a truck brake drifted up from the street below, and a gust of cold air rattled the old window panes, carrying with it a marshy tang from the river. It was the kind of night that made every sound feel deliberate, every movement deliberate too. My coffee had gone cold 2 hours ago, the ring it left on my desk already drying into a faint halo, but I wasn't here for warmth. I was here to listen. Through the thin wall of my office, voices bled in faint, but sharp enough to catch on certain words. Lori's tone was smooth, deliberate, the way she always spoke when pitching investors. Thad's was tighter, almost brittle, carrying the edge of someone trying to keep control while juggling more than his knuckles could hold. I eased my chair back 1 slow inch at a time and tilted my head toward the vent that carried their conversation like a conduit. Cutting the retirement fund, Lori's voice casual, as though she were discussing new wallpaper. It cleans up the balance sheet, looks good ahead of the merger. No one outside HR will notice for months. Thad grunted, his tone frayed. We do that, the board sees the higher margins, we close faster. My guy at the bank says it smooths everything. Everett's not going to raise a fuss, he's a glorified note-taker. My jaw stayed loose, but my hand curled around the mouse, waking the screen fully. The folders on my desktop opened one by one, each file name, another thread I'd been pulling for weeks. One of Thad's contracts was already sitting in my folio, tucked between legitimate quarterly reports, its language vague enough to skate past casual review, but specific enough to burn him if the right eyes saw it. The cursor blinked in the corner as I cued another email draft, this one marked for Silas with a 6:00 a.m. send time. I didn't need Silas awake right now. He preferred to rise with the sun, pour his first coffee, while the city was still yawning. By then, these files would be waiting neatly in his inbox, each labeled, time-stamped, annotated in my own spare hand. The whir of the HVAC deepened for a moment as the system kicked into another cycle, the vents sighing overhead. I leaned back just enough to catch the faintest creak from Lori's heels, pacing the pause in her stride as she whispered something low to Thad about optics and headlines. The tone was enough. I didn't need the full sentences to know the game they were playing. Optics for the board. Profit before people. And me in the corner, the man who fetched coffees and signed forms, letting them believe I was blind. I opened the folder marked Audit Trail, my finger hovering over the print icon as I highlighted the line in one email thread, a timestamp from a private server tying Thad to a payout structured quietly through a shell vendor. The whir of the printer was louder than I liked in the stillness, each page sliding out like a breath in the dark. I stacked the papers neat and square, sliding them into the folio and fastening the clasp with a soft, metallic snap. The brass lock felt cold against my fingers, the leather warm from resting against my knee. Another gust pushed against the rattling window panes, cold enough to stir the loose corners of a memo I hadn't yet filed. The papers fluttered briefly like a signal from the building itself. Savannah below was silent for that moment, save for the distant groan of a tugboat horn echoing upriver. The city felt like it was holding something in, like it was listening alongside me. I slid the chair back to the desk, my eyes on the softly glowing scheduled icon at the bottom of the screen. 3 more emails staggered across the next 48 hours, each one a domino waiting to fall. I powered the laptop down, its hum replaced by the low sigh of the HVAC and the faint rattle of the old window frame. The folio clicked shut in my hands as I rose, the weight of it reassuring as I crossed the dim hall. The city outside was still, the streetlights casting pale pools of light on the cobblestone below. I paused at the door, glancing back once at the quiet office, the glow from the exit sign casting everything in a faint red wash. My thumb traced the groove along the folio's edge, worn smooth from years of carrying more than just papers. The wind outside pressed once more against the glass, a cold push, and the papers inside shifted with a faint, dry whisper. I stepped into the hall, each footfall soft on the worn carpet, as the city exhaled beneath me like it knew a storm was coming. The diner smelled like bacon and coffee, that combination of grease and warmth that clung to the walls long after breakfast hours. The neon sign outside sputtered, casting a soft red glow across the tabletop, where I sat the chipped mug Silas had pushed toward me, steaming faintly. "Patience. Everett," he said, his voice low, calm, the kind of tone that made you lean in to catch every word. Sometimes the loudest move is made in silence. His hand lingered on the edge of the mug for a moment, a small gesture meant to steady me before he settled back in his seat. The navy leather folio sat open between us, heavy on the Formica table. A corner of a contract stuck out marked with Silas's yellow pencil notes, his handwriting sharp and deliberate. He flipped through the pages without rushing, eyes narrowing slightly at the highlighted timestamps and footnotes I'd added the night before. Outside, through the diner's wide window, a freighter slid along the Savannah River, its low horn vibrating through the glass and into the soles of my boots. Each sound, the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter, the buzz of the neon sign, the slow sip of Silas's coffee, seemed amplified by the quiet way we spoke. Silas tapped a page with the pencil, glancing at me over the rim of his glasses. "Your father built this company so folks could retire with dignity. Don't let Thad burn that down because he's desperate to polish his resume." He leaned back, letting the words hang there like steam rising off the coffee. My jaw tightened, but I didn't say anything at first. I let my eyes drift out to the docks, where the tugboats were nudging a container ship into place. Their lights flickered on the water green and gold ripples in the dark current, and for a moment I could see myself as a kid again, sitting on those very docks with my father, watching the same slow ballet of ships come and go. I remembered his voice, steady and low, pointing out which ships carried grain and which carried steel. How he used to tell me the men on board worked harder than anyone in those boardrooms we'd never see. "The river doesn't rush," he'd said once, his hand resting on my shoulder as the sun dipped below the horizon. "It just keeps carrying what matters, no matter who's watching." That memory sat heavy in my chest now, as Silas flipped another page and circled a date near the bottom margin of a contract. "This is your moment," Silas murmured, his pencil scratching softly as he drew the circle. "Wait for it. Then sign. Not before." His eyes flicked up to mine, steady, sharp. "Patience isn't weakness, Everett. It's leverage." "Let them think they're in control until you can close every door behind them with one signature." The pencil rolled across the page, coming to rest against the edge of the folio, like a period at the end of a quiet sentence. The neon sign buzzed louder for a moment, a flicker that washed the whole booth in crimson light. A waitress passed by, the scent of fried eggs and coffee trailing in her wake, the clink of plates punctuating Silas's silence. I closed the folio carefully, sliding the papers into place, the clasp snapping shut with a soft metallic click. The weight of it felt different now, heavier, but also grounding, as if those pages carried not just leverage, but a sliver of my father's old conviction. I stood, slowly tucking the folio under my arm, my coat brushing against the vinyl seat. Silas gave a single nod, his attention drifting back to his mug, as if our conversation had never happened. As I stepped out into the street, The neon sign buzzed once more, and finally went dark, leaving only the glow of the street lamps and the low, steady hum of the river. A cool wind rolled in from the water, carrying the faint scent of magnolia blossoms from some unseen garden, soft and unexpected in the chill of early spring. I paused for a moment on the sidewalk, listening to the tugboats call to each other in the distance, and felt that same quiet patience settle in my chest. The folio's leather was warm against my palm as I adjusted it under my arm, the clasp cool against my fingers. I started down River Street with the wind at my back, the scent of magnolia trailing alongside me. Behind me, the diner's windows reflected the faint glow of the river, and ahead, the cobblestones gleamed under the streetlights like a path waiting to be followed. Each step felt measured, deliberate, the rhythm of someone who could wait, who knew when to act, and who carried the weight of more than just contracts beneath his arm. The rip of paper sounded louder than it should have, tearing through the quiet like a rifle shot in an empty field. Every head in the conference room turned as Thad yanked the contract from my folio and split it clean in two, the halves dangling from his fists, before he dropped them onto the polished table. Overhead, the fluorescents hummed and flickered, casting a cold pallor over everything. The smell of disinfectant lingered beneath the faint bitterness of coffee, left too long in the pot, a stale edge that clung to the back of my throat. I didn't move right away. I just watched the pieces of paper settle one, fluttering to the carpet like a dying leaf. From the corner of my eye, I caught Cora Bellamy, the office manager, half hidden near the doorway. Her phone hovered chest-high angled as if she were casually checking a text, but her thumb hovered over the screen like she might be recording. Her expression was steady lips pressed together, eyes tracking Thad rather than me. Lori sat stiffly a few seats down, fingers laced so tightly, her knuckles blanched, her gaze fixed on the table, as if she could will herself invisible.
"Family charity case!"
Thad spat, his voice riding the hum of the lights. His face was red around the edges, sweat just beginning to bead at his temple.
"You take up a desk play secretary and expect to be treated like you're indispensable. You're not. You're a placeholder. We've carried you long enough."
His words came out clipped, like each one might cut me down an inch further if he said them fast enough. I could see the tightness in his jaw, the twitch of a vein along his neck. Whatever debt or deadline was gnawing at him, it was fraying the edges of his composure. I bent down slowly, letting my knees touch the stiff carpet as I gathered the shredded halves of the contract. My fingers brushed the cold metal leg of the table, the hum of the fluorescents vibrating faintly through it. The folio lay open beside me, its navy leather now marked with a fresh scratch along the edge, where Thad's ring must have grazed it when he pulled the papers free. I slid the pieces inside carefully, pressing them flat, the torn edges rasping against the leather as if they might scar it further. The clasp clicked softly as I closed it, a sound almost swallowed by the overhead hum. The room was quiet, except for Thad's uneven breathing and the faint tap of Lori's nails against her coffee cup. She didn't look at me. No one did except Cora, whose eyes flicked from me to Thad, a question hovering in her gaze she didn't voice. Thad straightened, smoothing the front of his jacket, as if the act alone could smooth away his temper.
"We'll present this merger without your interference,"
he said, loud enough for every corner of the room to hear. The fluorescents buzzed in agreement, their light flickering for just a second, long enough to make his shadow waver against the wall. I rose folio under my arm, the weight of it heavier now, not because of the papers, but because of what had just been done to them. My phone vibrated softly in my pocket, the preset reminder nudging me like a whisper. The meeting broke apart in murmurs and shuffling papers, no one looking too long at me or at the scraps Thad had left behind. Lori finally stood, her face pale, her hand resting briefly on the back of a chair as she steadied herself. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Outside, the savannah air was thick and warm, wrapping around me like a damp cloth the second I stepped out of the sliding glass doors. Streetlights reflected off the polished brick walkways, casting pale yellow puddles of light across the sidewalk. The folio's scratched leather caught a glint from one of the lamps, the mark along its edge stark against the dark hide. My phone buzzed again this time, a quiet chime announcing what I already knew email sent. The message to the parent company board was a way its attachments neat and damning. I paused beneath a streetlight, tilting my head back to look at the night sky where the stars were faint against the glow of the city. The hum of the building's HVAC was gone now, replaced by the distant murmur of traffic and the whisper of the river somewhere beyond the office towers. My thumb traced the fresh scratch along the folio's edge, the leather rough under the pad of my finger. The air smelled faintly of rain, heavy with the kind of weight that makes you certain a storm is coming, even if the clouds haven't rolled in yet. I started down the sidewalk, each step slow, deliberate, the night around me pulsing with quiet anticipation. The elevator doors parted with a soft chime, and the world beyond them was all glass and light. Atlanta stretched out beneath me, a web of glowing streets and towers, headlights crawling like fireflies along the arteries of the city. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and cologne the second I stepped into the boardroom, a quiet, expensive scent that clung to the paneled walls and heavy leather chairs. I wasn't holding anyone's coat this time, wasn't following behind to pour coffee or fetch signatures. The scratched navy folio rested against my arm, the same one Thad had scarred weeks before, now heavier, its edges lined with crisp contracts and stamped letters from the board itself. Silas walked in behind me, steady as ever, his hands folded over a slim folder of his own. His face was calm, unreadable, but I caught the faintest twitch of approval at the corner of his mouth as we crossed the threshold. The hum of the city below was muffled by the thick glass, just a distant throb against the silence of the room. The directors turned as one, their suits cutting a clean line against the warm glow of the recessed lights. A few nodded in recognition, though most just studied me with polite curiosity, waiting for the man they'd been told was nothing more than a family shadow. I set the folio down on the long oak table, the brass clasp clicking softly as I opened it. The scratch along its edge caught the light, a pale line against the deep navy hide, like a scar that refused to fade. Page by page, I slid the evidence across the table. The time-stamped emails, the side contracts Thad had buried the memos, outlining Lori's plan to bleed the retirement fund just to sweeten margins. Each sheet whispered as it moved, the paper sound echoing faintly in the hushed room. One director leaned forward, his brow furrowing as his eyes skimmed the highlighted lines. Another adjusted his glasses, glancing at Silas, who gave nothing away. "Everything you see here," I said evenly, was orchestrated without the board's knowledge. Every cut, every shell transfer, every whispered promise to the bank was designed to strip the employee's security for short-term optics. That ends today. My voice was calm, not raised, but it carried, filling the space as cleanly as the scent of the wood polish. No one interrupted. The weight of the city seemed to press against the windows, holding the room still. Silas slid over a slim document, his pen already uncapped. "Everett holds the controlling shares." he said, his voice low but firm. Per the company charter as acting CEO, he has full authority to override these actions and protect employee benefits during the merger. His words were like the final stamp on a judgment, a soft hammer no one had seen coming. A ripple of whispers passed among the directors, quick glances exchanged like shuffled cards. I signed the interim directives in 3 deliberate strokes, the pen scratching softly over the paper. The folio closed with a quiet snap as I handed the signed pages to the lead director, who looked at me for a long moment before speaking.
Mr. Calhoun, he said, his tone steady, as of now you're the sole authorized signer for the $60 million merger. I'll notify the Marwicks myself. He typed quickly on his tablet, the faint whoosh of an email sent filling the pause. On the screen, I caught a glimpse of the subject line before it disappeared. Meet your CEO. The room remained silent as I gathered the folio, its weight now different, not just documents and signatures, but a shift in gravity itself. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Atlanta's skyline shimmered a lattice of white and gold light against the winter night. I stepped closer to the glass, the cool surface reflecting both the city and the faint scar along the folio's edge as it caught the glow. My phone buzzed once-twice then, again the screen lighting up with Lori's name, then Thad's, each call sliding into the next like waves. I didn't answer. The hum of the traffic far below felt steadier than their frantic vibrations. The city's pulse deeper, slower, unbothered. I watched a plane trace a slow arc over the skyline, its lights blinking like a distant signal, and let the phone fall silent in my hand. The folio rested against my side, its leather warm, its scar visible, but no longer defining. I exhaled the glass fogging faintly before me, and let the weight of the moment settle quiet and absolute as Atlanta glowed on. The scent of magnolia blossoms hit me first, warm and floral weaving through the cooler bite of chilled white wine that lingered in the air. The ballroom was all polished wood and crystal light chandeliers throwing reflections across the glossy floor like scattered constellations. I felt the polished navy folio firm in my grip, its leather buffed to a sheen, despite the faint scar still visible along its edge. Tonight, it was no longer a mark of damage, but a reminder of what had been endured to bring me here. The river murmured just beyond the open terrace doors, carrying with it the faint, smoky drift of barbecue from the street vendors who had stayed open late for the occasion. Lori and Thad stood near the far end of the ballroom, their reflections fractured in the faceted light of the chandeliers above. Lori's shoulders were drawn tight, her lips pressed into a thin line, while Thad kept his gaze fixed on the paperwork laid out at the central table, as though it might offer him escape. Silas was a quiet presence near the back, his hands folded over a cane he didn't need, but carried anyway, a subtle reminder of patience and age in a room full of tension. Cora hovered at the periphery, her usual brisk energy tempered into something softer, her eyes meeting mine for just a second, steady and approving. The hum of voices tapered off as I moved toward the table, every step cushioned by the thick carpet, every glance following me as though they could all feel the shift in the current. The folio opened with a measured click, its brass clasp releasing as smoothly as a breath. I laid the contracts flat, their edges perfectly aligned, the stamped seals catching the chandelier light. My pen moved across the first page with deliberate weight, the scratch of ink audible even against the quiet shuffling of the gathered staff and executives. This merger, I said, my voice calm, not raised, but carrying easily in the room, will not be a victory built on sacrifice from the people who earned this company's strength.
As of today, a portion of the $60 million proceeds will be locked to fully restore the Employee Retirement Fund. And beyond that, we'll establish a community initiative in line with the vision my father built this company on to ensure it stands for something more than profit. The words weren't for Lori or Thad, not really. They were for the rows of employees near the back, their faces tired but attentive, and for the few board members who had flown in to witness the close. The final signature came with a weight all its own, a line of ink that felt more like a verdict than a flourish. The folio closed with a soft, decisive snap, the sound cutting through the silence like a quiet bell. For a heartbeat, the room stayed still, as if everyone was waiting for someone else to breathe first. Then the applause began soft, at first, then building a ripple moving through the staff and the executives alike. It wasn't raucous or theatrical. It was the kind of applause that came from relief, gratitude, and the recognition of something being put right. I glanced toward Lori, whose eyes had dropped to the floor, her fingers twisting at the clasp of her clutch. Thad met my gaze briefly, a stiff nod that carried no warmth, but at least acknowledged the reality he couldn't change. Silas, still in his chair near the back, allowed himself the faintest smile, his chin dipping once in quiet approval before his eyes drifted back to the floor-to-ceiling windows. I didn't linger to bask in the sound. The terrace doors stood open, and I stepped through them into the humid evening air. The soft breeze off the Savannah River wrapped around me heavy with the scent of magnolia and the salt-sweet hint of marsh. The distant bellow of a tugboat horn rolled low over the water, mingling with the muffled hum of the city beyond the riverbanks. The folio hung at my side, its polished surface catching the faint amber glow of the terrace lights. Leaning against the cool iron railing, I let my eyes follow the lights drifting along the dark water, each one a reminder of how steady the river remained, despite the chaos on its shores. I could still hear the muted applause behind me, but out here, the world felt still again, the air holding that weightless pause that only comes after something long buried has finally shifted. The folio rested warm against my palm, no longer a burden, no longer a weapon, but simply what it was meant to be, a vessel for the work that mattered. The tugboat horn sounded again, low and resonant, as I breathed in the night and felt the tide, both river and circumstance, settle into a calm I had waited years to feel. The cicadas were already in full chorus when I stepped into Silas's office, their steady drone leaking through the cracked window panes like a soft tide. The place smelled the same as it always had, old leather paper browned at the edges, and the faint tang of coffee that had been sitting in a pot since dawn. Morning light spilled across the oak desk, catching on the grain in the wood and warming the brass fittings on the shelves. Silas was behind the desk, sleeves rolled neatly to his elbows, pouring coffee into two mismatched mugs as if the world hadn't shifted so completely in the past few months. "So, what now, Everett?" he asked, his voice low and easy, sliding one mug toward me as I took a seat. The navy folio rested against the corner of the desk, its leather polished clean of scratches, the brass clasp catching a beam of sunlight. Beside it stood a framed photo of my father smiling faintly in a grainy black and white shot, his arm draped around me when I was no older than 10. The sight of it tightened something in my chest, though not in a way that hurt. It felt like a weight settling, grounding me. I flipped open the folio and slid out the stack of papers Silas had prepared, founding documents for the Calhoun Community Fund, a trust carved from the merger's profit that would seed scholarships, emergency grants, and programs for the employees and families who had built this company's bones long before Lori or Thad ever sat at a board table. My pen moved across the lines, each signature deliberate. The scratch of ink, the only sound inside, apart from the cicada's rising hum beyond the window. Cora appeared at the doorway, her energy tempered into quiet professionalism, a folder of supporting documents balanced in her arms. She placed them gently on the desk, meeting my eye, with a brief, steady nod, before slipping out her soft footfalls fading down the hallway. Silas watched her go, then leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his fingers laced. Legacies, he said, his tone somewhere between advice and memory, are built by what we leave behind, not what we take back. You've done the hard part. Now make it last. I didn't answer right away. My eyes drifted to the photo again, the way my father's easy grin softened even in black and white. I reached for the seal press, sitting at the corner of Silas's desk, the handle smooth from years of use, and pressed it down on the last page. The stamp bit into the paper with a satisfying firmness, leaving behind a perfect impression of the fund's emblem. "This one's for you, Dad," I murmured under my breath, the words just for the man in the frame and for myself. The cicadas outside swelled their song louder, filling the quiet space like a tide pushing in. I closed the folio and set it gently on the shelf behind Silas's desk, the polished leather catching the last angle of sun as it rested against the wood. It felt less like a tool now, and more like an heirloom, its place no longer in my hands, but as a marker of what had been set in motion. The hum of the cicadas rose another notch, spilling through the open transom like a low, insistent drumbeat. I stood the mug of coffee warm in my palm and took one last look at the desk, the papers stamped and stacked, the photo still watching over it all, and the folio gleaming softly from its new place. Outside, the chorus of insects was almost deafening, but it felt less like noise and more like the world itself taking notice as one chapter closed and another began. Children's laughter rose and fell with the breeze as I stepped onto the riverside lawn, the fading sunlight painting everything in shades of amber and rose. The scent of pecan pie drifted from a nearby table, mingling with the smoky curl of barbecue from a grill set up near the edge of the crowd. Beyond the line of folding chairs and food stalls, the Savannah River caught the glow of the sinking sun, its surface turning liquid gold as it slid under the bridge. I paused for a moment, hands in my pockets, letting the sound and smell of the evening wash over me before walking toward the new community center. The building stood modest but proud brick and glass, framed by string lights that swayed gently in the autumn breeze. On the balcony, the navy folio hung from the railing, its leather polished to a deep sheen, the brass clasp gleaming as if it had never been scratched at all. It didn't need to hold papers anymore. Tonight it was just a quiet emblem, a reminder of the work done and the choices made to bring everyone here. I moved to the small stage near the center's entrance, feeling the soft give of the grass beneath my shoes, and took the microphone. This fund, I began, my voice steady but low, meant more for the people leaning forward to listen than for the cameras set up along the edge exists, because this city and this company deserves more than numbers on a ledger. It exists because families here work, build and give without expecting the ground to shift beneath them. This is for them, for us. My words weren't long, and they didn't need to be. The applause that followed was gentle, almost reflective, a ripple of acknowledgement rather than celebration. As I stepped down from the stage, a small pair of arms wrapped suddenly around my waist. Jamie Laurie's boy tilted his head back to look up at me with a shy grin. "Thanks for saving Mom and Dad's jobs," he whispered, his voice half swallowed by the noise of the crowd. I ruffled his hair lightly, nodding once, and watched him dart back toward a group of kids chasing each other near the food stalls. His laughter folded easily back into the sounds of the evening. I found a quiet spot near the edge of the lawn where the lights dimmed into the natural glow of the sunset. From here, I could see Lori standing a few feet away, her posture softer than I remembered her hands clasped lightly in front of her. She didn't meet my eyes right away, but when she did, she crossed the short distance and spoke just above a whisper. "Thank you, Everett. No excuses, no apologies drawn out. Just those words, simple and fragile." I met her gaze, nodded once, and let it rest there. Some things didn't need more than acknowledgement. The last of the sunlight slipped below the horizon as I settled onto a weathered wooden bench by the river. The air carried a faint trace of magnolia, despite the season, a sweetness mixed with the cooler edge of the evening breeze. The chatter of the crowd had become a soft backdrop, a hum rather than a din, as the water lapped gently at the riverbank. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment, feeling the bench creak quietly beneath me. "Some victories don't roar," I murmured to no one in particular, my words carried off by the wind.
"They just breathe by the river."
The river answered in its own way, a slow, steady sound as the lights of the bridge flickered to life above it. I sat there a while longer, breathing with it, the evening stretching out calm and unhurried, until the sounds of the event behind me faded into nothing more than a soft memory. The last light of the day caught on the polished folio resting by the community center's balcony, its once rough edges now smooth, a quiet reminder of how far we'd come. Standing there with the hum of cicadas in the distance and the faint sweetness of pecan pie on the breeze, I realized justice doesn't always roar. It can settle like evening air, calm and certain. Sometimes bridges collapse, so we can learn which ones are worth rebuilding. For anyone facing layoffs, fractured families, or late-life crossroads, there's still space to plant something new and see it grow. What about you? Has life ever handed you a second chance you didn't see coming?